Today's an exciting video because I get to once again push my craft further than I thought was possible as I once again tried to emulate one of my favorite artists of all time, one of my personal heroes, Alex Ross. So let's go ahead and roll that intro and get into this awesome video.
What's up guys, I'm J-Rod of BATTLEBrawlerproductions, new channel. Welcome. We craft amazing comic book style illustrations, variety of different mediums. Today is an exciting video because I'm going to try and paint like one of my favorite artists of all time, Alex Ross. Now this is what I painted last time I was studying his style and trying to emulate his work, and I absolutely love this. This is still one of my favorite things I have ever painted. This is my superhero Wrath in a hyper-realistic design, or as I describe his style, fantasy realism. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about with that discussion, you clearly didn't see part 1 of this video, go ahead and check that out. It's linked both in the description, the comments, and somewhere on screen. Definitely recommend it because I went into a big discussion on what Alex Ross's style is, along with his process of creating art. But to summarize, I really describe his style not as hyper-realistic, but as fantasy realism. It's not a realistic drawing of Batman, but a realistic drawing of what a child would imagine Batman would look like. The fact that it's not armor, it's Kevlar, and it captures that fantasy and whimsical feel of comics, but with realistic rendering. Now, of course, that's my opinion of Alex Ross's art style, and would love to hear your guys' in the comment section down below. It's a discussion I really want to have with you guys to see not only if I was able to capture it with this piece, but also how you guys view and interpret Alex Ross's work, because I think there is a level of interpretation in his style, especially with how people describe it as both hyperrealism and fantasy, and my personal interpretation of fantasy realism. So it's a discussion that I think is really worth having. I don't know what the discussion on the previous video was because I haven't actually posted that video. I'm still editing it. I was really excited to revisit this concept. Plus, my wife really pushed me to illustrate one of her favorite villains that I've created, and that's what we'll be doing today. Now, let's go ahead and break down what Alex Ross's process for creating art is. I did go more in detail with last month's video, so go ahead and check that out. Step 1 of the Alex Ross process: research and photo reference. Most of what Alex Ross paints comes from a photo, and he doesn't actually do a lot of stuff from his head. That means that his paintings are very accurate, and he has some type of resource that he's going from. While he has a visual library for texturing and costumes, he's actually combining a lot of the physical aspect that he observes to make sure the painting looks as real, or in my opinion, as real as it needs to be. And in that sense, that's why I really like his art books, because he shows the reference process and how he uses them. He's not stealing something online that he doesn't own or something that isn't free to use. He's making his own references. And while usually they're friends of his in costume, himself, or even action figures and statues, I think he's using these references in a really unique way to just build up that realism as much as the piece needs. Now, I unfortunately don't have access to anyone that has the right body type that I need for this reference, so I went to one of my favorite online resources, Pose Archives. I've been using them for years. They're all free to use. These guys are incredible. So many poses, and I decided to go with this drawing right here. I feel like it captured what I wanted perfectly, so that's going to be our reference that we'll build upon. Step 2 of the Alex Ross process: rendering in pencil. Almost all of his paintings are first rendered in graphite, and these are absolutely stunning pieces of art in themselves, but it's really how he's able to refine and get everything to the point where it's ready for painting, and that's what we're going to do in our step 2. Now, when I do big projects like these, I like to use these Kansan Mixed Media artboards. They're really good, high quality, super thick, and can take almost anything you can throw at it. All we got to do really is just do our penciling, which shouldn't take too long. See, didn't take long at all. We have a realistic sketch of Gluttony, and I'm so excited with how this turned out. This sketch looks amazing. Now, I sketched it in blue opposed to graphite because in the previous video, I learned my lesson that when I sketch these designs in graphite, they actually really don't show well with the gouache on top. So we're going to be inking this, and that will be one of the main deviations that we'll be doing from the Alex Ross process. But not only does it help to make it our own, it also make the piece look as best as it can. So we're going to do that first before we get into step number 3, which is gouache and wash. Wash being the technique, gouache being the paint. And yes, I do believe that all of Alex Ross's comic work is done in gouache. Now, a common question that you're going to have is, what is gouache? I've heard of acrylics, I've heard of oils, I've heard of watercolor, but I've never heard of gouache. And why does Alex Ross like it? Well, to oversimplify what gouache actually is, it's essentially an opaque watercolor. Designed to look like oils but dry like watercolor, it's so versatile in fact that depending on that water to paint ratio, you can have it look like oils, yes, but also watercolor and acrylics. And Alex Ross takes advantage of that by using a series of gouaches and then building up upon that with the gouache in its more opaque form to create his beautiful illustration. It's actually a technique similar to what I use, where I do a lot of washes in my artwork, create an idea of depth, mood, and atmosphere of my pieces, and that's actually why I like gouache. I studied it in college, but I fell in love with it seeing what Alex Ross was able to do, and I've just pursued it ever since, and it's become my favorite paint medium. So we're going to combine it with my favorite medium of all time, ink, create our illustration. So let's go ahead and roll that super time lapse and get into the first step of bringing this piece to life in an Alex Ross style by first making it a little bit of our own through ink.
Inking this piece was super fun and overall an enjoyable experience. I've mentioned it 1,000 times on the channel, but inking is my favorite medium. I love to work in this medium, but the thing about ink is so versatile and there's so much you can do with it. Now, one thing I want to explain is some of the techniques and the methodology of the inking process. For one, the methodology. You see, when I went into inking this project, since I already inked something beforehand, being the raft piece that was very similar, almost identical in the same concept, I knew what I needed to do. For one, I couldn't use my dip pen because I wasn't going for extreme line variety. It was definitely still in my thought process when making this piece, but it wasn't the main focal point. That's why there's not a lot of line variety. It's actually more similar to a French comic, which has very minimal line variety. There is a specific name for it, I just don't know it off the top of my head, so I do apologize. When it comes to traditional comic book inking, especially in America, in Japan, and for my style, I like to incorporate a lot of line variety, which is why I still use my dip pen, because I'm able to create a lot of dynamicy and the illusion of a three-dimensional form on a 2D paper. Here's the thing though, I didn't need to do that with this piece, because I'm actually sacrificing the line variety and the inking so I could have a good foundation to do the gouache on top of. If I made the line variety too intense, it would actually be really distracting. So that's one of the key things there. And also one of the differences between an artist and an illustrator, because as an illustrator, I'm actually putting the piece before my normal techniques, giving this what it needs to shine in the best way. Now, because of that, the tools that I used were only 4 microns, my 05, 03, 01, and 005, and I used the 005 really only in the hair and very specific areas, mainly because what I found is that if you go below a 01, it actually is much easier for the gouache to cover it in the different layers of washes that I'll be doing. So that's why most of the detail was done with a 01, a lot of the outlining was done in a 05, and then some of the separation and extra detail added was done with a 03. So I can get some line variety, but only as the piece needed. Again, I am not focusing on the inking techniques, I'm really focusing on a solid foundation to do the gouache techniques on top of. Another thing is the actual process of inking. For one, I start from the top left and work my way to the bottom right, or essentially work wherever I know I need to adjust the paper to ink and I know I won't be able to smear. Because the ink will still be wet, microns do dry really quickly, but they don't dry instant, so I still had to be careful to make sure I wasn't causing any smudges. So that's why I always like to turn my paper, and if you really look at the process that I do, sometimes it definitely seems a little weird or almost jarring to actually have me move the paper like this and then ink this spot and then ink that spot. It really is kind of like figuring out the best way to work on this piece without damaging it, and that's essentially what this entire process is. I absolutely love going in and adding all the detail work. I'm also making sure that I have enough room, and I'm not drawing from my fingers, I'm actually drawing from my wrist and from my elbow to ensure that I have really long smooth lines that don't look broken up, that look very uniform and don't look very scratchy. So that's another technique I was using, and overall I really enjoyed the entire rendering process. My 01 micron really came in handy, going in and adding all the line art, adding all the detail. It seriously is one of the most relaxing, one of the most satisfying things to do as an artist, is just to add all that detail and bring the piece to life. Again, if you notice, I'm just doing the line art. I'm actually not doing any of the shading work in ink, because again, we'll be doing that in gouache. And then another thing I want to explain is the design of the actual creatures, or the superheroes and villains, however you want to look at them. I kind of view them more as heroes and villains, but I know some of you guys like to view them as creatures. The idea behind these is that they're essentially living muscles. Now, if you took a human and you skinned them, that's what their suits look like. They are comprised of these just incredibly intricate designs, these living muscles, they move, this life to it, and that's essentially what I want to capture in this piece, is this living muscle look, which definitely posed some challenges. For one, boobs, they're just fat, so how do you make that work with the design? Well, I think I figured it out. The teeth are based off of iguana teeth, so I had a lot of fun incorporating those. I tried to base them off of crocodile teeth, but I found iguana teeth had some really cool designs. Considering her motif's a frog, I felt like that fit really well. The frog eyes were really fun to design, and also going in and doing the smoother parts of the muscle, like the tongue, that's like an interesting muscle there that I thought, you know what, let's leave that smooth and slimy, that works really well. And then also the green parts being that smooth, almost heart-like muscle was really cool. So because I was going to do all the rendering in gouache, I decided not to do any techniques there, but I still like the way it laid out on the body. Overall, it was super fun to do. Now, the two hardest processes of this piece were surprising to me, because I thought they would be maybe the hands or the rows of teeth, but no, it was actually the jaw, trying to get that jaw design where it was open but still see-through, so I could go through the whole entire length of the body. That took a little bit of finessing to get it just right. And then the second hardest part for me was the hair. Really struggled with it because I imagine she had very curly hair, so I was really trying to make it come alive without having it look like it was also made of muscle. Personally speaking, I feel like I didn't quite get the hair to look as realistic as I would like, but I kind of like the idea of the hair also being made of muscle, so I'm honestly cool with that. And overall, I really like how this piece came out. This is my wife's favorite villain, so I really wanted to make sure that it looked good, that it was exactly what she wanted, something that she would love, and I feel like I really nailed it, because every time I was working on this piece, she would come in and say, "Josh, this looks amazing," so that's how I knew knew I was doing a good job because really, again, wanted to make this special. Not just for me, not just for you guys, but for my wife. So this was definitely a super fun challenge that you guys know me. I love a challenge. I love rising up. And this is one where I feel like I definitely just leveled up my skills. So let's go ahead and take a look at this piece in its finished inks.
Alrighty, so it's the next day, and I have to say, I love what we have. This looks amazing. The cool thing about doing portraits like this is that yes, you get something really awesome and cool and realistic, but you also get something really cool and unique in the middle. So let's go ahead and do a little mini reveal with what we have so far. This looks absolutely amazing, and I still can't believe we have so much to do. So before we get into the actual painting, I just want to make a couple quick notes. For this project, I went out and purchased the Winsor & Newton Lift Preparation Watercolor Medium. This was supposed to actually help me be able to lay down a bunch of colors and then remove them easily in selected areas. And while it does do that, it really doesn't do that in a small area. In fact, I actually did a couple test swatches, and I found that these bottom two, the area was just too small for it to work. But you know what did work? This right here, my traditional masking fluid. So I figured, you know what? That's just going to be what I have to do. I'm going to go in with a very light wash of green that I want to have be on the teeth and the drool, and then I'm going to mask that area off so I can go in and then do the heavier intense colors, really build up those tones, remove it, and then work that later on. Mainly because I work in a lot of washes with my gouache, so I really like to build up my lightest and go to my darkest values, so it's a lot of layering, and that can be really messy with those smaller detailed areas. So that's what we're going to use for in these areas here, and I think it's really going to do a good job giving this a really cool life to it, but it does mean that I'm going to be using a ton of my masking fluid, so hopefully there's enough in this bottle. I think there is. Let's just hope. Now, before we get into the actual painting itself, we gotta pick our colors, so let's go ahead and grab it from our gouache wall. Starting us out, we have Holbein Leaf Green Gouache, Holbein Permanent Green Light Gouache, Winsor Newton Permanent Green Gouache, Winsor Newton White Gouache for cleanups, Daniel Smith Phthalo Yellow Green Watercolor, Daniel Smith Buff Titanium Watercolor, Dr. P.H. Martin's Radiant Concentrated Watercolor Kali Pathos Green, and the real MVP of this whole project, the Knit Ram Liquid Charcoal.
The first step to any good gouache painting is the underpainting. This is where we go in and set our values, our tones, the overall mood and feel of the piece, and I knew exactly what I wanted for this one. This was a quick process, not gonna lie, but it's super important, and I decided to go in with a nice mixture of Holbein Leaf Green and a little bit of Daniel Smith Phthalo Yellow Green to create the perfect shade of this toxic, bright, slightly yellow green, and I just went crazy on the paper. I'm not worrying too much about coloring in the line. I'm just getting it down there because I clean it up, cover it up later, but I wanted to get that feeling, that values, and overall the mood of the piece across. One thing that I did in the previous one I did was I did a base of red for my raft drawing, and that added this warm element to everything, an intensity that really carried with the character and the overall feel that I wanted. Here, I wanted it to be very sick, very kind of disgusting, very toxic, and that came across perfectly with the colors that I mixed. I'm going in and I'm really just applying it heavy. I'm not worrying too much about lighting just yet because this is my underpainting, this is my base coat that everything else will go on top of, so I have plenty of time to refine it, but I just want to get it on the paper as my first very important step to this piece. After the underpainting had plenty of time to dry, I decided to go with my masking fluid to mask off very specific key areas. Now the masking fluid that I'm using is Prebio. It's one of my favorite ones. I've been using it for years. Some people like it, some people hate it. For me, it gets the job done. And the reason I'm going with the masking fluid on the slime, the teeth, and the eyes is because I want to preserve them in a very specific way. For one, the intricacy and design of the slime makes it very easy to cover up with whitewash when I go to clean up the background, but the teeth are just really small and there's so many of them, it's going to be really difficult to work the different areas around it without accidentally accidentally covering them up. And I wanted something very specific for that. You see, I didn't want to have a lot of green or liquid charcoal on the teeth. I wanted to do something really unique with them, so that's why I'm preserving them. And then for the eyes, I had a different plan for that I want to preserve as well. Because I'm going to go in these areas with different gouaches and some watercolor mixtures and really kind of go in and refine them, it's really easy to just kind of go out of the lines with watercolor. It's really easy to be loose with it. And because of that, I wanted to make sure that these areas were preserved in a very nice way. Now, this process only took about 37 minutes, so it wasn't super fast, it wasn't super quick, but overall, it was a necessary step that made sure that these pieces were protected and that I could really go in and be loose when I needed to be, but also still be precise and not to worry too much about losing or covering up elements that I need to preserve for the future. Because while gouache is an additive and subtractive medium, I still am using the gouache as if it is a watercolor, and it's definitely going to be more on that additive medium because I want to keep my line art, I want to keep my ink work. So this is just some of the things that you have to think through when you're working with these mediums. Overall, really happy with how this step came out, even if it did take a little longer than I would like, but hey, that peace of mind is 100% worth it because I was able to create something really beautiful, and this step was super important in that. After giving the masking fluid about 30 minutes to dry, I decided to go in with my quill and a little bit of liquid charcoal and just put down some color. During this process, I'm not worrying about staying in the lines because again, I clean it and I'm really just putting down the initial layers and I'm slowly building and refining it. And that's the key to this process, is while gouache is definitely an additive and subtractive medium, it's one that you can still build up, it's one you can still make work, it's one that you can have a lot of fun with. And essentially, that's just kind of what I'm doing. I'm having a lot of fun bringing it to life, putting the colors down. This is really where you can see the piece come to life, and I'm doing my shading and my shadowing, and I'm really doing my highlights as well, and I'm having a lot of fun during this entire process. This took about an hour and 8 minutes to get the initial layer of liquid charcoal down, and I still built and refined it, so I'm not saying I did it all right here, but this was a really enjoyable, fun process where, again, I'm just going in and I'm bringing the piece to life. I'm almost sculpting with the actual paint where I'm adding those light values in, and it's super fun. Again, I'm going in with the watercolor mentality of I'm really just adding onto the piece. I'm not going to be subtracting, I'm going to be making those darker values darker, and that's the only direction I want to go. And I'm constantly referencing my original reference because I want to make sure that the lighting that is in that piece is here, and then I'm matching it to give it that life. I don't want to work harder by having to think about that, which is weird as that sounds, but I'm kind of taking the shortcut of just using the natural lighting and the shadows that are in my reference into this piece. Yes, I built upon it. Yes, I added fantastical elements, so I do have to think with those, but still, I'm just kind of using these as a guide to really go down and put my values in. And one thing about gouache that I really want to just highlight about the medium, not only is it super forgiving, brush strokes look really good with it. In acrylics, in oil, in watercolor, sometimes the brush strokes just don't look right. In gouache, it's always good to see the brush strokes because that gives it that human element. I wasn't afraid to just keep some of those strokes in there. I wasn't afraid to keep that human element in because I'm human. I painted this by hand and I want to have that relatability, that aspect in there, that tactical feeling. The fact that this isn't just something done on a computer, this is something done by hand, and I want that life to be in the piece, so I'm not afraid to have those mistakes in there because it gives it character. I'm also not afraid to switch up brushes as I need to because I'm going in initially with my quill, but then I also go in with my round 3 and my round 4s and my round 1s when I need to, just to build up a little bit extra detail, work the paint in a specific area. Again, I'm just making sure that those values are in there, and I'm making the areas that need to be dark as I can. It's a long process, but it's one that I enjoy, and while it can be definitely tedious, and I did go back and forth and work some areas maybe a little too much because it definitely started to lift on the paper. So I had something that I was super proud of, and I just need to keep bringing it to life and keep refining it, but just do it in layers so that I can stop, see the piece, and make sure that I was giving it the intention that it needed in its specific spots and steps. After finishing with the liquid charcoal, I decided to go in with all of my green gouache, and I had a lot of fun with this process because this is really where I would add to bringing this piece to life, the rendering, the detail. Now, I mentioned that the idea of these suits are that they're living muscles. That's essentially what these creatures are, but the colored parts of them are meant to emulate your heart muscle, the smoothest and strongest muscle of your body. So when it comes to rendering this in the gouache, it always proposes a challenge, but it's a fun challenge that I really enjoy. Going in and creating texture with my brushes, smoothing it out, and creating that lighting that goes hand to hand with what I laid down with my liquid charcoal. And overall, this was an incredibly fun process. Working with gouache can be boiled down to you're working with an opaque watercolor medium, and while that is a greatly oversimplified version of what gouache actually is, in actuality it is a far more versatile, really in-depth medium that there's so much you can do with it. There's so much that really it's capable of, and I love taking advantage of it with some different paint to water ratios. I did notice that when I was using some of my green Holbein gouaches, they were really railroading as they dried, so I had to really go in and layer them down. And again, with my technique, I am going light to dark, even though I don't have to do that with gouache. It's still something that I personally like to do. So I'm really taking my time, building up my shadows, really getting that whole sense of depth and shading down, and it's a really fun and enjoyable process. I'm also switching brushes quite regularly. I'm either using my round 3 or my short liner or my quill. This is a process that definitely is one where you really want to have a lot of different tools in your tool belt just to execute what's in your head, and really kind of sculpting the gouache as if it was light to create that illusion of depth. And this was one of the more time-consuming processes of this piece, but it was one that was definitely well worth it. Even though I did get the majority of the green coloring down, I still will be going through and refining it still in the future processes. You can even see in here I did go back and touch up a little bit of the liquid charcoal just to add more depth. So that's one thing about this medium and these projects, is you can always go back and add more. There's really no way to know when to stop, so having some self-control and knowing when you've rendered something out enough is just key for these projects. But yeah, absolutely love how all of the green came out on this, and we're going to keep going further with the next stage. After I was happy with the liquid charcoal and all the green areas on her, I decided, you know what, let's go ahead and take a break, but let's not stop working on the piece. Let's go ahead and cover the background with white gouache so I can really clean it up, and that would also make her pop more off the background, giving her a different contrast of looks against the stark white gouache. And I have to say, I was really happy with the look of it. While it did take incredibly long at 2 hours and 47 minutes, that was time well spent because it just made the piece look that much cleaner and also gave her that necessary context that I really wanted her to have. Now, the reason it took so long was because there were so many intricate parts to it. For example, we have hands, teeth, slime, tongues, drool. There's a lot of different things that I need to go in and very carefully use my liner brush to go in with that white gouache to make sure that I wasn't covering the actual figure. Luckily, I didn't, but if I did, gouache is such a forgiving medium that I could easily just reactivate that layer of white gouache and remove it, or I could just paint on top of it. And that's what I love about this medium, is how easy it is, how versatile it is, what you can do with it. And while again, it did take the longest to clean up that background, I felt like it was time well spent because it allowed me to take my attention away from her but still keep her in the foreground, what else I need to do with her, but not feel like I am hyper fixating or hyper focusing, that I'm really trying to look at the piece as a whole and figure out what it needs. And that's really why I waited for this stage to go in and cover the background. Some of you are probably thinking, hey, you could have done this sooner. Some of you are probably thinking it should have been the last step. Either way, I think it was perfectly placed where it needed to be to just give me that little break and that little time to just reevaluate and formulate a plan for the next stages. After giving the background plenty of time to dry to make sure that I didn't cause any smudging or smearing on the piece, I then decided to work on some of the green areas such as the inside of the mouth and the tongue. Now the tongue was a really fun piece because this was an element that wasn't in my reference. I actually did find a couple really cool references of frog tongues extended out while they were going to catch some insects, and that was my main source of inspiration and how to do the lighting, how to even do the slime effects. This is an element that is coming straight from my mind. It's not coming from my reference, and the lighting was really enjoyable. The most time-consuming part of it was layering the darker tones. Again, I'm working light dark because I'm really thinning out my gouache and treating it more like watercolor. So I'm able to get those deeper values, the different layering, the tones, but more importantly, I'm actually able to get a little bit of the spontaneity of watercolor to help with that organic look, that slime look, that slippery look that frog tongues have. And this was a super fun process that I enjoyed. Now, if you notice, I'm using my quill quite a bit. It's such a versatile brush, but I am going in with my other brushes such as my short liner to add those highlight moments to really sell that wet, slimy, sticky look. This was a super fun process that definitely took quite a bit of time, but it was time well spent to really bring this piece to life in a very unique way. After getting the inside of the mouth and the tongue to a point where I was really happy with, I grabbed my cement pick-upper and cut it not in half, but just enough of a sliver that I could use as if it was a pencil, and decided to remove all of the liquid masking fluid. Now this wasn't a time-consuming process, but it's definitely a nerve-wracking process, mainly because I was really nervous that I would rip the paper or I would pick up layers of the gouache that I placed down. While that has not happened in the past, it was definitely something that was in my mind just because I already invested so much time in it. I just didn't want it to get ruined and have to start over. Luckily for me, the worst that happened was I just had to go over some of the line art, mainly in the teeth and in the eyes that I drew, because the liquid mask fluid really liked to pull up those areas, but the paper wasn't damaged. There was no significant loss outside of just some line art that could easily be fixed, and this process, while nerve-wracking, didn't take that long. It was about 30 minutes to remove everything and to also fix those areas, so this was time well spent and allowed me to focus on the next area of this piece. Now that the liquid masking fluid was removed, I can go in and start painting those elements that I purposely alienated from the rest of the piece because I wanted to play off of that underpainting in a different way. Going for the slime, it was really tempting to make it just a slight gray or just a yellow, but I really thought keeping the green theme would work, and I was really glad I did. Though I did keep the green a little more on that yellow side just to kind of sell that toxic, sick look that I was going for. Now, I pretty much only used my short liner brush for this because of all the intricate details and small areas, but this was a really fun process to do. Now, I'm naturally not trying to follow light when I'm doing this because it's a thick viscous slime. I decided to just kind of go with the flow of the slime, so I'm not really paying attention to lighting in a more realistic way. I'm definitely going for more of a impressionistic way. I really think that works, and it definitely continues that tone and feel of the piece. It gets so toxic, in fact, it actually doesn't follow the normal laws of physics. So that was kind of the thought process there. Really liked how it came out, and really am happy with how the green mixed, how the gouache is thinned out. This was a super fun process, as this whole entire process was, but this one for some reason was one where I could just be a little more loose and just have a little more fun placing things down and not worrying too much about those accurate lighting and accurate physics. And now we're into the final steps that really, in my opinion, tie this piece together, the teeth and the eyes. Starting with the teeth, this was a bit of a tedious process, but it was one that was needed because it really brought the piece together and gave it a really cool life, but in my opinion also made it look very realistic, because I could have left these teeth just white and it would look very unnerving, it would look creepy, but it wouldn't look realistic. So mixing in a little bit of buff titanium, my phthalo yellow green, and leaf green really did just the right amount of tinting, especially with my underpainting, to give it that unnerving, rotted, that really disgusting look that I was going for. I really like how each teeth came out. Now, I actually don't know how many teeth are in this piece. I didn't count them, but I can tell you it's a lot. I drew each individual one, I detailed each individual one, I painted each one. It was really fun to do, and it really mixed with my underpainting to create that sickened look that I was going for. It was time consuming, yes, but it was time well spent. Then after that dried, I decided to go in and color Gluttony's eyes. Now, a common question that a lot of people ask me is, does Gluttony have 4 eyes, since you have the human head and then you have the eyes in her stomach? Well, in actuality, no, she only has 2 pairs of eyes and they're in her stomach. The actual human eyes, if you look, are covered by skin, so they're actually useless. These eyes were really fun to detail. I decided to go in and just darken the black areas a little bit more, and I mixed in a similar combination of phthalo yellow green and leaf green, but I didn't use any of the buff titanium to really give it that bright green sickening look, because again, in nature we do see that these poisonous toxic frogs are very bright, very green, very neon, and I wanted to get some of that in the look of this, not just with the green areas but also in the eyes, and this was really fun to do. Definitely took a lot of layering, definitely took a little bit of work, but it was well worth it. And the part that really sold this idea, in my opinion, was going in with a little bit of that white gouache just to add a little bit of the reflective light in the eyes to really sell that they are glazed over, that they're liquid, that this is a living thing. Those 6 little dots just added so much life to this piece. I was tempted to add them to some of the lip areas, but I said, you know what, no, just in the eyes, that's going to sell it. And after that was done, I did a little bit more cleanup with my fine liners, areas that got covered up, and this piece was finally finished with all the layers of gouache, all the watercolor, everything. I love how it came out. We're not ready for reveal, we have a few more steps to do, but in terms of coloring and painting, we are done and ready to move on to the next step. Now, we're not quite done yet, we still have a few more steps to do, and one of those steps is to seal this piece with wax. Now, I wait 24 hours to seal all of my gouache paintings with wax just to ensure that everything is nice and dry, and I like to apply it with a cotton swab. This is a process that doesn't take that long and can be scary at first if you've never done it, but it's a step that I really do recommend doing just because it adds a protective layer onto your gouache and watercolor paintings that not only make them waterproof, but ensure its protection and longevity. Now, it does alter the colors by about 5 to 10%. In my opinion, it actually makes them a little darker and richer, which I prefer. It's one of those things that I really do recommend, especially if you're in a high humid environment like I am. I live in Florida, so almost all of my professional watercolor and gouache paintings are now sealed with wax to ensure that longevity, so that I can have a piece that looks really nice and will last the test of time. This process took less than 10 minutes, and now that we're done, we can move on to the next steps to finish up this piece and get ready for that grand reveal. Upon removing the tape, while none of the artwork itself was damaged, those corners were peeled pretty bad, and it does not look good. And I want to frame this piece and have it look amazing. So luckily for me, there is a quick and easy way to fix this. Just take any type of wax-based color pencils, I like to use Prismacolor, and apply it to your paper. Just make sure it matches the color paper, so if you have a cream paper, have a cream color pencil. For me, I actually use a combination of the white Prismacolor and the color Splendor, and I just applied it gently to all of the torn areas, and it filled it in quite nice, making it look flush and almost brand new. This process didn't take that long, but it was time well spent just to give it that little extra professional presentation. And now that we're done, we're finally ready to look at the piece in all of its finished glory. So let's go ahead and get that grand epic reveal. Done, and guys, I love how this piece came out. Easily in my top 10 favorite pieces of the year. This is one of those artworks where I definitely feel like not only have I pushed myself as an artist, but I've essentially kind of leveled up my craft. I love everything that went into it. I love how it looks. This is seriously one of my favorite pieces I have ever made, and this is part 2 of our 7-part series of trying to paint like Alex Ross. I would love to hear your guys' feedback in the comment section down below. Please let me know what you guys liked about the piece, and also areas that you think I could improve on. Your guys' feedback not only helps me become a better content creator, but a better artist. But let's go ahead and frame this and take a look at what Sarah thinks of this, because I may like it, you may like it, but we gotta make sure that Sarah likes it because this is her favorite villain. Let's go!
Hey Purdy, guess what?
What?
It's done.
Dude!
Your favorite villain in an Alex Ross style.
This is definitely my favorite design for it.
And, guess what?
What?
It's for you.
Nuh-uh.
Yes.
Dude!
Do you like it?
Absolutely! This is absolutely going up on the art wall, you know. So this may be my favorite design of your villains, but it's not my favorite villain.
Who's your favorite villain? Is it Lust? Well, the next one I'm going to be painting is Envy, and then I might do Lust after that.
Right.
So, this is part 2 of a 7-part series where we're trying to paint like Alex Ross. I'm glad that you like it, and we're going to have fun doing the next piece. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate that?
Oh, easy 10.
Easy 10?
I love the slime, like the slobber. Like, that is just so cool.
Thank you all so much for watching. Sarah, thank you for liking the piece. It is yours, and it is one that I really wanted to make special for you. Please subscribe to the channel for more art animation-based content. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully my wife was able to add a little pizzazz at the end. This is a bit of a longer video, and yeah, you guys are awesome. I'm Jay Rod at BLACKEST. This is Sarah Apple. You all have a wonderful day. Keep being creative, and remember, we draw the power in our own soul, and we try to be creative every day.